And back with me, LNP Queensland Campaign Director James McGrath and Labor strategist Bruce Hawker. James, the Treasurer doesn't believe there are many, if any, federal implications from the Queensland result, from the sorts of discussions you and your candidates would have had with voters. Do you think there are?
There are. I mean, he's correct. The campaign was essentially fought on state issues, except for the carbon tax. And the cost of living in Queensland is the number one issue, and the carbon tax and its introduction is going to really hurt Labor. So in terms of implications, you know, my advice to the Prime Minister, not that she's going to listen to me, would be defer the introduction of the carbon tax and allow the people to vote on it. Because I think you'll find that Queenslanders are going to be particularly annoyed in terms of paying higher electricity and in terms of the impact upon industry in Queensland.
Bruce, what do you think about the suggestion that there are no federal implications at all, or should federal Labor be having a look at its policies?
It was overwhelmingly an election that was based on state issues, that's for sure, and there, however, were cost of living issues built into that. There's probably a level of unease in the electorate because of the decision not to reinstate Kevin Rudd as Prime Minister. Obviously, coming from Queensland, there was a feeling about that in the electorate, but we weren't really reading any of that in the polling. The polling was very much focused around the It's Time factor and and a failure in health particularly. And it is a significant but. There was a perception in the electorate that Anna Bligh had breached confidence with the electorate over the sale of Queensland Rail, and to the extent that that trust issue is something that Julia Gillard has to address with regard to the introduction of a price on carbon, then she really needs to do a lot of work across the country, and particularly in Queensland, to address the anxieties that the electorate has. The only way I think she can really do that is by selling the compensation package for the carbon tax really very aggressively, particularly in Queensland, because of the peculiarities of the Queensland's electorate's concerns about the Gillard Prime Ministership.
Well, we'll take a look at how both federal parties might handle the run-up to the next election in a minute. But first to the latest news poll. It was released just 2 days after the Queensland election and showed that if an election was held now, Labor would not be winning it.
Well, the poll shows that we've got some work to do, but the Prime Minister makes the point that we won't abandon our significant reform agenda, and it's an agenda that will deliver for working families.
She also told the Australian people the great big fib before the last election, which was that there would be no carbon tax under a government she led. Now, we've seen the electorate's reaction to governments who tell fibs before an election just last Saturday.
James, from your experience running the Queensland campaign, how soon should the federal coalition be ready for an election, particularly given the vagaries of a minority government?
Well, my understanding is that we're ready now for an election, and Tony's been quite clear in calling for an election now and calling for a vote on the carbon tax. And what Jamie Briggs just said there is correct about this great big fib. It is, you can compare directly what happened with Bligh before the 2009 campaign and with Gillard. Once politicians make a sort of core promise and then break it, they do breach the trust with voters. And Gillard has done that with the carbon tax.
And given your experience and the fact that you won more than you expected in terms of seats, how, from your experience, is the best way to run those sort of seat-by-seat campaigns, by engaging the local candidates rather than imposing a kind of one-size-fits-all strategy from top down?
I think the main thing is for the candidates to represent their community and be part of their community. And what you saw on Saturday in Queensland is that our candidates, selected by rank and file branch members, have been out campaigning for 12, 18 months, talking to people, listening to people. And one of the things I think Labor's got to look at is where they get their candidates from. I do think they get too many from unions and from staffer lists. We look at ours. We had someone who served in a deli. We've got an environmental scientist. We've got a partner of one of the world's largest law firms. We've got journalists. We've got all different types from across the spectrum are now members of Parliament, and we're going and they will. Sorry.
Bruce, what do you think the task is for Labor, because it has to focus on governing too, not just getting ready for an election campaign?
Well, I do endorse what James said about the selection of candidates, and I've been talking about this for a long time. We do actually rely too heavily on union officials and professional staff members to fill the ranks of the Labor side, and I think we've got to change. We've got to change soon. In the next Sydney City Council elections, for example, here in New South Wales, Labor is going to have a form of primary operating, so people who aren't members of the Labor Party will actually be able to have a vote in who would be the Labor candidate. We've got to be looking at all sorts of ways of changing the way in which we select candidates, and I don't think we should wait for too long to do that, because the quality of the local candidate is actually very important, not only in winning the seat, but also in the quality of the representation and the debate and the legislation that's passed in Parliament. We really have to be looking at excellence all the time, and I think there's a lot of work yet to be done in that space.
And for the next election, Labor can't afford to lose any seats. It actually has to win some.
Exactly right, and that's where we come back to Queensland, unfortunately, because we lost a lot of seats in Queensland in 2010, probably directly as a result of the removal of Kevin Rudd. And I'm sorry to have to keep coming back to that, and everyone knows where I stood on that issue. But I do think that they're going to have to work very, very hard in Queensland because of the peculiarities of the decision to remove him as Prime Minister and replace him.
And we're about to run out of time. James, if I could ask you one quick question. Is it your intention to attempt to stand for Parliament at the next election?
Yeah, it's my intention to nominate for pre-selection for Fairfax up on the Sunshine Coast, an area I grew up in, but that'll be in the hands of the party members up there.
And that's where we'll have to leave it. James McGrath and Bruce Hawker, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining Capitol Hill. Please be with us at the same time on Monday. Until then, have a good weekend. Good night. Are two men who worked on the campaign, the LNP's campaign director, James McGrath, and the Labor strategist, Bruce Hawker. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll start with the federal reaction to the Queensland election result.
It's pretty obvious that the Queensland election was a verdict on governments which don't tell the truth.
The dimensions of this defeat took me by a bit of surprise on Saturday night, and Labor in Queensland, state Labor, got a lot of rebuilding to do. We've got a lot of hard work to do, and I'll get on and do it.
James, there's been a lot of commentary about why Labor lost and why your party won. A lot of talk about the it's time factor and whether Anna Bligh really lost it after she broke some election promises. What are the real reasons that the LNP had such a massive victory last Saturday?
Queenslanders have had a Labor government that's been in power for 20 years, and they've had 20 years of bungles, lies, waste and incompetence, and they had a choice to give that government another 3 years or go to Campbell Newman, who was positive, had a vision for the future, had his contract with Queensland, which was about less waste, more jobs and better services, and they voted for change.
So it was in the end a combination of the longevity of the Labor government and some quite specific issues?
Yeah, it was a combination of, look, this government was tired. It had lied before the last election. The voters were annoyed about that. But it wasn't just a vote against Labor, it was a vote for Campbell. Because our campaign was actually a very positive campaign. Sending out the contract with Queensland went out to about 800,000 households in the last week of the campaign. So we had a job during the campaign to convince people that Campbell and the team had the vision and the plans to get the state back on track.
Bruce, in reality, even if Labor's campaign had been a flawless one, was this an election that Labor was never going to win?
I think probably that's right, Lyndal. We went into the campaign about 15 points behind and we came out about 15 points behind. Apart from a short period after the floods in Queensland when Anna Bligh really peaked as a very popular Premier, Labor has struggled since 2009. And I think it is fair to say that the privatisation of QR, Queensland Rail, proved to be a big issue for the electorate. It set the tone in many ways for the government. And then on top of that, we all had a number of real issues in the last year or more, one of which was the Health Department payroll bungle, which just kept going on and on and on and on. And then, of course, we had the so-called Tahitian prince who just reminded people about problems in health. After, as James says, about 20 years almost uninterrupted of Labor government, I think its time factor was overwhelming, and that was one of the things that we just found impossible to counter in the end. In a way, the election that Anna Bligh won in 2009, was very much the high watermark for Labor, even though we went back a bit, because that was probably the election we didn't expect to win.
As James pointed out, Labor ran a very negative campaign. In the end, whatever you're up against, do purely negative campaigns really work anymore, if they ever did?
Well, I think one of the issues with the benefit of hindsight was that this was a campaign that went on and on and on. And of course that was Anna Bligh's call, not the opposition's, and we can't blame anybody for that. But I think the sense that it was extremely negative was probably exacerbated by the length of the campaign. But in many ways, the problem was that we didn't really have too many places to go in the campaign. Education was one area where I think we did have a good story to tell, and Anna Bligh did tell that very effectively. We created an extra year of schooling in Queensland to bring it up to 13 years in line with the rest of the country, and there were some other reforms in that area too. But there wasn't a heck of a lot to say that was very positive because of the problems which I'd discussed before, the privatisation, health and so forth, issues which really went to, I guess, people's perceptions about the age of the government.
James, any campaign is a mixture of positive and negative. How do you judge getting that balance right? Does it have a lot to do with where the party is, if it's running against a long-running government or not?
Yeah, you make decisions based on terms of where you are in the political cycle, but it's how you use negative campaigning, and I think Labor's campaign in Queensland did go beyond the boundaries of what is acceptable by focusing relentlessly not just on Campbell but on Lisa Newman and her family. And I actually think that in the end hurt the Labor campaign because I think people reacted badly to it, and I think that showed in Saturday's result. The one thing I wanted to pick Bruce up on just before is that in the target seats there was a real contest up until that last week. In those target seats, the Labor members of Parliament were very popular, they were well known, and they were running 100 miles from the Labor brand because the Labor brand was toxic. And 10 days out, I couldn't find the 14 seats that were going to give us the majority in government because too many seats were in the sort of 53 to 47 range. Some to us, some to Labor. It was only in that last week where, after Bligh made her comment about there being no evidence, with the CMC then clearing Campbell, that the voters then really did start to swing to us, and that's when we'd put most of our TV ads and most of our material to hit the letterboxes up until Bligh's. Sorry.
And that's the reason why the win was, even I dare say, unexpectedly large.
Yeah, I think anyone who says they're going to expect it to be this big wasn't seeing the polling that was taking place in those target seats, because it was a battleground. Where there were retiring Labor members, like Mundingburra and in Cairns, I was confident that we would take those seats. But the seats beside them, Barron River and Townsville, there was a real contest on there.
And Bruce, do you think that campaigns can, and it's often been said swing votes, particularly in the last week, and that it was the campaign that was the reason behind Labor losing so badly?
Well, campaigns can swing the vote in the last week, and there's no doubt about that. Unlike James, our polling, I think, was pretty consistently dreadful for us going in and coming out of the election campaign. However, I would agree that the CMC's decision to clear Campbell Newman was a death knell, a complete death knell for Labor. I don't think we were really in the running at any time, and I'm surprised that James says that so many seats were in contention in his view. But I think once the CMC had said that Newman had nothing to answer for, we were in a very difficult position. Up until then, there was certainly a high level of disquiet we were picking up in the electorate about a number of issues to do with his period as Lord Mayor, which is probably too extensive to go into now. But when the CMC made that comment, and Anna Bligh made an unfortunate comment to the effect that there was nothing in her, that she had to support the claims, then I think that effectively gave the electorate permission to do what they've been wanting to do all along, and that was to vote for the LNP.
Well, we'll have a look at the implications for the federal parties in a minute. First, to a federal Queensland member, the Deputy Prime Minister and Treasurer Wayne Swan,